The rusted chain carved cruel circles into raw flesh, a grotesque collar forged in abandonment. Where there once was thick fur, only red welts remained, flies orbiting like mourners over a grave not yet filled. The German shepherd ribs pressing sharp beneath matted coat lifted his head with the fragile dignity of a fallen king. His amber eyes met Jake's resigned pain, staring into weathered sorrow. Jake Martin framed by his wheelchair, and the scent of pine and heat froze on the edge of the clearing. Time did not slow, it stopped. Two beings who knew suffering intimately, one trapped by iron, the other by memory. In the dog's gaze he saw something unspoken, a question perhaps, or recognition. Jake felt breath hitch in his chest, the ache of something long dormant, stirring. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, knuckles whitening on the wheels. There was irony in this moment. A man without working legs confronted by a creature who could barely stand. Yet there beneath the cicadas and the Texas sun, a silent vow passed between them, one of defiance against abandonment. The chain was heavy, the padlock buried in dirt. Jake couldn't reach it, not like this. Still, the dog didn't flinch. No growl, no retreat. Just a low, broken whimper that seemed to carry every betrayal he'd known. "You're not dying out here," Jake murmured, voice cracked with emotion. "Not like this. Not alone." No one could have known then how far that vow would carry. That this moment, hidden in the hush of rural woods, would ripple outward, altering lives far beyond the boundaries of County Road 22. But in that moment, all that existed was a wounded man, a broken dog, and the unbearable silence between their heartbeats. Jake leaned forward and poured water into a lid. The shepherd's tongue barely moved. He broke a protein bar in two and placed it near the dog's snout, then adjusted the shade with trembling hands. "I'll be back," he promised, voice low. "I swear to you." As Jake turned his chair, the dog released a soft, hesitant whine. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of hope. Jake's wheels groaned against the uneven trail, each rotation a painful vow of return. His breath burned hot in his chest, muscles quivering as he reached the cabin. He grabbed what he needed without hesitation: bolt cutters, antiseptic towels, water protein packs, and was back on the trail within minutes. His heart beat faster than it had in years, not from exertion, but from urgency. The woods swallowed the sun as shadows lengthened, painting the trail in tones of rust and sorrow. Jake pushed through anyway, guided by instinct more than memory. When he returned to the clearing, the German shepherd hadn't moved. The chain still bit into his neck like a judgment passed, but his eyes opened. He saw Jake. "I told you I'd come back," Jake whispered. It took all his strength to cut through the rusted links. Each snap was a liberation, not just of metal, but of spirit. As the final section dropped to the ground, with a metallic sigh, the shepherd released a shaky exhale, as though something inside him dared to believe. Jake wrapped the dog in a blanket, and with practiced strength, born of rehab and regret, lifted him onto his lap. The weight was uneven, awkward. The dog's body trembled with each bump of the wheels. Yet neither of them cried out. By the time they reached the porch, dusk had swallowed the horizon in deep indigo. Jake's arms were jelly, his shirt soaked through. The German shepherd had not made a sound the entire journey, but as Jake opened the door, he felt the dog's head rest lightly against his chest, an exhausted surrender. Inside, Jake laid him on a nest of towels by the wood stove. The room was quiet, but not empty. Not anymore. He washed the wounds slowly, cleansed the dirt from matted fur, applied ointment with a tenderness reserved for things already lost once. The shepherd didn't resist, didn't growl. just watched with those amber eyes, as if measuring the worth of this new human. "You're safe now," Jake said softly over and over again, though whether he meant it for the dog or himself, he didn't know. That night, Jake didn't sleep. He sat nearby, listening to the shallow breath of a creature not yet convinced the nightmare had ended. Morning came with muted gold bleeding through the cabin windows. Jake stirred neck stiff from the couch and turned toward the shape curled by the stove. The German shepherd lay still, breath shallow, but present. His eyes flickered open at Jake's movement, registering not fear, but awareness. Dr. Reeves arrived mid-morning, a gravel-voiced country vet with decades etched into her hands. Her examination was brisk but gentle. Malnourished, dehydrated, infected wounds, she murmured, probing, with the care of someone who had seen too much suffering in too many forms. "But he's a fighter. No broken bones. His teeth are good too. Someone cared once. Then someone didn't." Jake stood at her side, his jaw locked. "Can he recover?" "With time," she said. "Physically, yes. Emotionally. That's on him and on you." After she left, the house felt different, like it was waiting. Jake made a bed on the floor beside the dog. Not out of obligation, but because something in him refused to leave the shepherd alone. He spoke softly, about nothing, about everything. About war and Sarah, about the cabin and the silence that used to suffocate him. He fed the dog from his hand, bit by bit, bite by bite. The shepherd never took more than needed. Eye contact still made him freeze. But he was eating. On the 7th day, Jake wheeled into the room and felt the air shift. The shepherd looked up. A faint flicker, no unmistakable a tail wag. It was small, hesitant, but it carried the weight of 1,000 gestures. The first spark of something sacred trust. Jake blinked back the sting in his eyes. Well, that's new. On the 9th day, the shepherd followed him into the kitchen just a few steps, silent and steady. Jake didn't turn around. He didn't want to spook him, but he smiled wide and real for the first time in months. By the 12th day, they had a rhythm. Feedings, rest, porch time. Jake read aloud from his worn books, voice low and patient. One afternoon, while reading The Old Man and the Sea, he paused and said, "I should name you." The dog's ear twitched. Jake smiled. "Ranger. How's that sound?" The shepherd blinked. Jake chose to believe it meant yes. That night, Ranger padded behind Jake with a softness that felt intentional. No command had been given, no leash pulled taut. It was choice, quiet, and voluntary. Jake moved through the kitchen, preparing dinner, pretending not to notice the steady rhythm of claws on wood behind him. But inside, something loosened like a wound, finally beginning to scar. Weeks passed in slow, deliberate healing. Ranger gained strength in increments. His coat regained a healthy sheen. His wounds faded to pale ribbons of memory, and the band of scar tissue around his neck, though permanent, no longer looked like a death sentence. It became something else, entirely, a mark of survival. Jake found himself talking more. Not out of loneliness, but out of habit, an echo of a man he once was. He told Ranger about Sarah again, this time aloud, as they watched the sunset bleed across the porch. She wanted a German shepherd, said they had the kindest eyes. Ranger tilted his head as if acknowledging her from beyond time. Jake's routines evolved without him noticing. He set alarms. He bought groceries for 2 weeks at a time, instead of one. He started drawing plans for a fenced yard, wider paths, thinking not of limitations, but of possibilities. He hadn't done that in years. Each morning began with stretches and exercises, Ranger watching attentively. Each evening ended with a slow moment by the fire, the dog resting near his wheelchair like a sentinel. When Jake dropped his keys one afternoon, and Ranger retrieved them without prompting, Jake paused. The tail wag, the calm delivery. It wasn't a fluke. It was instinct shaped by their time together. Jake looked at the dog heart caught between awe and grief. "You're not just healing," he said. "You're helping me heal too." He started logging their progress dates, reactions, what worked, and what didn't. The same discipline he once applied to battlefield reports now tracked the training of a dog who'd once been discarded like garbage. But this wasn't war. This was reclamation. "You're not just a pet," Jake said one night, his voice thick. "You're my purpose." Ranger nudged his knee, then laid beside the wheelchair. Not submission, not obedience, loyalty. As the Texas summer softened into crisp autumn air, Jake found himself reaching back through memory for the voice of his grandfather, for the unspoken language he once shared with military dogs overseas. Commands were simple. Praise was gentle. The rule was always the same: mutual respect. He began training Ranger in earnest. Sit, stay, come. The basics, yes, but taught with patience, not precision. Ranger, still haunted by the echoes of a chain and the hunger of abandonment, flinched at sudden movements. But when Jake whispered, when his hand gestures flowed like a calm stream instead of a barked order, Ranger responded, willing, trusting, eager. "You're catching on quicker than half the K9s," I knew, Jake muttered one afternoon as Ranger retrieved a ball and dropped it not on the ground, but into Jake's lap. His tail wagged, not nervously, but with quiet pride. Jake began noting everything: Ranger's reactions, sensitivities, victories. The notebook became a mission log, a map of progress marked by symbols, a tail wag, a silent approach, a voluntary rest beside his chair. One night, sitting by the fireplace, Jake realized something else. Ranger wasn't just learning to help, he was already doing it. The dropped keys, the water bottle, the emotional radar. What if this dog, once left to die, could become a certified service animal? Jake opened his laptop and fell into research. The more he read, the more amazed he became. Ranger already performed half the behaviors required for service certification, and the rest, just refinements, adjustments. The training evolved. Jake taught him to retrieve specific items by name: keys, phone, remote. A small bell was added to the door. Ranger learned to nose it when he needed to go out. Then came more advanced tasks: pulling open the refrigerator with a rope, tugging off Jake's boots at night, bringing water bottles during exercise. Dr. Peterson, his VA counselor, noticed the change immediately. During their next video call, she leaned forward, her voice warmer than usual. "You look lighter," she said. Jake smiled faintly. "I guess he's making life easier. He gives me something to move toward." Outside the window, Ranger lay in the yard, head lifted toward the breeze. He didn't bark. He didn't chase. He just watched, ever present. And for the first time in years, Jake didn't feel watched over. He felt accompanied. Their story didn't stay quiet. It started with a blog, Jake's way of venting, after a tense encounter with a neighbor who accused Ranger of killing chickens. The post was raw, honest, filled with rage and grief, and the ache of nearly losing what he had just begun to rebuild. He ended it with a simple line: "I don't expect anyone to read this, but it feels good to say it out loud." 3 comments appeared by morning, one from a fellow veteran who'd found healing through a pit bull, another from a local woman who called Ranger a hero. The third came from a professional dog trainer who offered encouragement and advice. Jake replied to each. Then he wrote another post, and another. The community began to grow quietly at first. Fellow service members, animal rescuers, strangers who'd never met a soldier but understood loneliness. His inbox filled with voices. Ranger's name echoed beyond the cabin walls. Then came the news story. A local station picked up their blog and aired a 3-minute segment, a paralyzed vet, and a once-abandoned German Shepherd, now partners in healing. Footage showed Ranger retrieving items, nudging Jake gently, during stretches, resting his head against Jake's leg, in silence. When asked what Ranger meant to him, Jake had only said, "I thought I was rescuing him." But the truth is, we rescued each other. That line struck a chord. Pet supply companies sent care packages. Volunteers offered to build ramps and fenced yards. A national nonprofit reached out one that trained service dogs for veterans and asked Jake to speak at a workshop. Jake hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't his strength. But when he opened his inbox one evening and saw a message from a Marine who had been considering suicide until he read about Jake and Ranger, something shifted. The Marine had attached a photo of himself with a one-eared shelter mutt. Both looked scared, but both looked alive. Jake replied, heart-thudding, "Sometimes the right soul finds you when you both need it most." And he accepted the workshop invitation, because suddenly he understood. Ranger hadn't just saved his life. He had returned to Jake the one thing trauma had taken and pain had buried: purpose. It happened just after midnight. January wind scraped at the cabin walls, whistling through cracks in the old siding. Jake stirred, disoriented, then jolted upright as Ranger's paw struck his shoulder. Not a playful nudge, but urgent, deliberate. Ranger Jake's voice cracked, still thick with sleep. The dog didn't bark. He tugged Jake's sleeve, eyes alert, body tense. Then the smell hit acrid sharp. Smoke. Jake spun his chair, adrenaline surging as he followed Ranger into the living room. Flames licked the baseboard near a wall outlet. Old wiring, dry wood, a disaster waiting to bloom. Panic surged, but training took over. The fire extinguisher was too far. The front door blocked. That left the back. "Come on, boy," Jake rasped, lowering himself, shirt over nose, and pushed hard toward the back door. Ranger pressed close, guiding like a silent lighthouse. Jake's lungs burned, vision blurred. He reached for the door, locked, hands shaking, fumbling. Then Ranger moved. He leapt, slammed his weight into the panic bar Jake had installed months ago. The door burst open. Cold air surged, enwrapping Jake in salvation. They didn't stop until they reached the oak tree at the edge of the property. Jake turned just once to see his home, devoured by flame. The place that had been his shelter, his tomb, his beginning with Ranger, gone in a roar of orange and black. He buried his face into Ranger's fur. "You saved me," he whispered, voice breaking. 3 weeks later, in a borrowed rental cabin, the pain struck again. It started with a lightning bolt of nerve agony, a cruel gift of his injury. Jake collapsed, paralyzed by the fire inside his own spine. The emergency injection kit lay on a dresser across the room. Impossible. Ranger sprang into action. No hesitation, no command needed. The shepherd dashed to the dresser, grabbed the black case in his teeth, and delivered it. When Jake fumbled with the zipper, Ranger helped open it. When Jake's grip faltered, he steadied the syringe with his snout. Silent. Steady. Only after the injection was done, after Jake's gasps turned to breath, did Ranger rest, head on. Jake's chest, heartbeat a grounding rhythm in the dark. Jake whispered into the silence voice, ragged and full of awe. "What did I do to deserve you?" He didn't say thank you. He said partner. Word of Ranger's heroism spread fast. Jake hadn't meant for it to become public, just mentioned it during a routine call with Dr. Peterson. But within days, the story had rippled through the VA into veteran networks and finally to Catherine Simmons, the director of a National Service Dog Association. Her voice on the phone was crisp but kind. "Sergeant Martin, we understand your dog performed life-saving actions without formal training. That's rare. We'd like to help certify him officially. Jake agreed. Weekly training began. Equipment was delivered. Ranger passed each session with quiet confidence, adapting to structured commands with ease, though Jake noticed he still worked best when allowed to follow instinct. Then came the media request, a feature during Veterans Week. Jake hesitated, wary of spectacle. But the world needed more stories like theirs. Stories where pain didn't have the final word. They filmed on the porch under morning light. Ranger performed with calm precision, retrieving, alerting, responding. When the interviewer asked what he'd say to other veterans struggling with isolation, Jake looked into the camera and said, "I thought I rescued Ranger. But we rescued each other. And there's no shame in needing rescue." The story aired to millions. Emails flooded in. Veterans shared their own journeys. Shelters reported a surge in special needs adoptions. A carpenter offered to rebuild Jake's cabin. And then, an invitation arrived from Second Chance Guardians, an elite training facility for service dogs. The proposal was staggering: move Ranger to their national facility in Colorado. There, he'd help develop programs to rehabilitate other rescues into service dogs. His legacy would ripple outward, impacting countless lives. But it meant separation. Jake sat with Ranger on the porch that night, snow drifting like memory. "They want you to help others," he whispered. "You'd be cared for, safe, needed." Ranger's head rested on his knee, amber eyes searching Jake's face. When the white van arrived, Ranger walked to the open door, then paused. Slowly he turned, circled Jake once, and sat pressing his body firmly against the wheelchair. He'd made his decision. Thomas, the handler, blinked. "I've never seen anything like that." Jake smiled through tears. "He's not leaving." Second Chance Guardians agreed to a new plan: rebuild Jake's home into a regional training center. Ranger would help others, but never have to leave the man he chose. Because some bonds aren't forged by bloodlines or contracts. They're forged by fire and the choice to stay. Spring brought more than rebuilding. It brought a letter, formal, cold, from a law firm. A couple, Robert and Diana Whitfield, claimed ownership of Ranger. They'd seen him on television, they said. That was their dog. Duke, they called him. Lost a year ago. Stolen or strayed from their fenced yard. Jake's hands trembled as he read it. Not because it made sense, but because it didn't. These weren't the people who'd found Ranger. They hadn't sat beside him as infection festered, hadn't heard his lungs struggle for breath, or watched his ribs rise like broken scaffolding. And now they wanted to take him. "No," Jake said, voice shaking. "They're not taking you." Calls went out to Second Chance Guardians, to Dr. Reeves, to legal aid. The organization moved quickly, assigning a sharp-eyed attorney named Elaine. "They don't have a case," she told him. "We'll prove he was abandoned and abused. You've provided care training and medical necessity. That bond is yours." But the Whitfields filed suit. They produced puppy photos, held interviews, cried in local newspapers. Public sentiment, once united behind Jake, began to fracture. Some said he should do the right thing. Return the dog. Others defended him, pointing to the scars around Ranger's neck, to the records of treatment, to the unspoken loyalty visible in every photo. Jake's blog, once a place of healing, became a battleground. He started moderating comments, shrinking inward again. He canceled a veterans event, declined interviews. Sleep slipped away, and with it the fragile peace he and Ranger had built. Ranger noticed. The dog became restless, more alert. He ate less, coughed a dry, subtle hack that Jake dismissed at first, chalking it up to stress. 3 days before the hearing, Jake awoke to the sound of retching. Ranger was on his side, struggling for breath. Eyes glassy, flanks heaving. Panic roared. Dr. Reeves arrived fast, stethoscope already around her neck. Her diagnosis was grim pneumonia, likely tied to smoke exposure from the cabin fire. "It's serious," she said, "but he's strong. He's a fighter." Jake followed the transport to the clinic, refusing to leave Ranger's side. He slept in his wheelchair, his hand always resting through the kennel bars. "You have to pull through," he whispered. "We have to show them." Outside, the world kept spinning: lawyers, court dates, media frenzy. But inside that quiet room, it all came down to one thing: survival. The hearing loomed like a storm cloud. Ranger remained hospitalized, hooked to oxygen, his once bright eyes dulled by fever and medicine. Jake barely left the clinic, except to shower or retrieve documents. He watched the monitor, like a battlefield scan, waiting for a sign: a small spike in oxygen, a decrease in heart rate. Hope came in fragile waves. Elaine sat beside him the night before court, setting down her briefcase and coffee with practiced calm. "You look awful," she said gently, "but we need you sharp. The Whitfields are coming with their Norman Rockwell image. We need truth." Jake glanced at Ranger, his chest rising in labored rhythm. "He should be there," he said hoarsely. "They need to see him." Elaine nodded. "Then we'll make them see through you." She helped Jake prep, walking him through statements, timelines, care records. But nothing could prepare him for the ache of being asked to prove that love was real. By morning, Ranger had stabilized slightly, still too weak to leave, but breathing easier. Jake ran his fingers through the dog's fur before leaving. "Hang on for me, buddy." In court, the Whitfields played their part well. Tears, photos, statements about a lost pet named Duke. The courtroom murmured in sympathy. When Jake took the stand, there was no fanfare. Just a man in a wheelchair, eyes ringed with exhaustion, voice steady despite the quiver. He spoke of finding Ranger, of the chain, the rot, the silence in those amber eyes. He spoke of nursing him, training him, nearly dying in his arms. He listed no possessions, no receipts, only moments. Then Elaine played a video: Ranger opening the fridge, tugging off Jake's boots, resting his head on Jake's knee after sensing a pain attack. The room fell silent. When the judge asked, "What would happen if he were taken from you?" Jake answered simply, "I'd survive. I've done that before. But I'd lose the best part of myself. And I think he would too." The ruling came the next day. Custody granted to Jake Martin, citing documented abandonment abuse and the unbreakable bond between veteran and service animal. The court ruled the Whitfields had forfeited all claims. Jake sat in the clinic beside Ranger, tears slipping down his cheek. "We did it," he whispered. Ranger stirred slightly, resting his muzzle against Jake's hand. The message was clear, even in silence. Home. Spring painted the Texas countryside in soft greens and yellow blooms. The reconstruction of Jake's cabin began in earnest. Only now, it wasn't just a home. It was a mission. Thanks to the support of Second Chance Guardians and a wave of public donations, the new design included wide ramps, accessible doorways, and a state-of-the-art canine training space. A covered porch overlooked a fenced yard, dotted with obstacles and benches. It would be a sanctuary not just for Jake and Ranger, but for others like them. Veterans began to visit. Some came with broken dogs, others with broken hearts. Jake didn't preach. He just showed them how a discarded animal could learn to trust. Again, how a broken man could find reason to rise. Ranger, now certified, served not only as a service animal, but a model of what was possible. Word continued to spread. A national magazine ran a cover story titled "Unbreakable Bond: How a Paralyzed Veteran and an Abandoned Dog Rewrote the Rules of Recovery." The photo showed Jake in his wheelchair, one hand resting gently on Ranger's head, both of them facing the sunrise. One afternoon, a group of trainees watched as Ranger retrieved Jake's gloves without being asked. A filmmaker documenting their work whispered to her cameraman, "It's not just training, it's intuition." Jake overheard and smiled. "It's attention," he said. He watches me like I watch him. We're tuned. Their harmony wasn't mystical. It was earned. Through nights of pain, through courtrooms and fire, through trust, rebuilt one paw step at a time. And then came the ultimate test, another spring storm. Jake, waking in the middle of the night, felt no pain. This time, only calm. Ranger lay curled beside his bed, breathing steady. Jake reached down, touching fur that was once matted and filthy, now warm and soft. "You chose me," he whispered. "After everything, you still chose me." Outside, the trees swayed. The rebuilt home stood strong. Jake wheeled to the window, Ranger at his side. They looked out into the night, not with fear, but with purpose, because tomorrow a new veteran would arrive, another soul unsure of their place in the world. And thanks to Ranger, Jake knew what to say. "Let me show you what rescue really means."